Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Ramona. I know the joke is always you should see the other guy, but in this case, I am the other guy
I was just gonna
because
ask you what happened.
I was in Montana and I was on a run, and there's like this island in the middle of a river, and it's not really great for running, and there's a lot of stones and stuff. Um, so I took a spill and sort of blocking um, some branches with my hands, which is how my face ended up taking the hit. So
Well, it's tough. It looks really tough, Tommy. It's really tough. I had that same kind of action
so how
last
does
year, right there. I had seven
what happened to
stitches
you?
skateboarding.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I just kind of did a face plant right in the street, and I therefore have given up my skateboarding career. No more skateboards for me. I'm getting too old for that. So we got to watch out.
I know, I'm 40 now, so I can't take many kinds of spills anymore.
Yeah, no more spills for either one of us.
So how does it feel? This is like, I was trying to figure out if your book coming out is like sending your kid off to kindergarten for the first time, or if it's the kid off to college. I don't know which one makes more sense. I know you definitely have been working on this for a long time, so today must feel like probably better than either one of those days in some ways.
Yeah, I'd have to say probably college, because I think because I've had 10 years to nest with it. I kind of it does definitely feel like childbirth after spending that many years getting it out there. But it feels good. It's when you worked on it that long, and um, you send it off in a good way, and you hope that people enjoy it, and people have been enjoying it, and so I feel like I did a good job. So in that way, it's kind of like sending your baby off to college. You did a good job, you raised them right, and they're going to do okay out there, and I just sending them off, and it's going to be okay. And so yeah, it's exciting. It is exciting, and I'm really just glad to see that people are enjoying it, and it isn't, scaring anybody too much, or I'm just glad that it's well received. So it's been good.
It's a really great book, and I saw that you got a book trailer, which is super cool to have a book trailer. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it.
I made it actually.
Oh, nice.
My husband and we worked on it. It took us a couple of weeks, and him having to film me out on the bridges at night, and you're trolling Albuquerque at like 1 o'clock in the morning, trying to get some of those shots. And we're running around with cameras in the middle of the night in Albuquerque. So that was fun. And so I'm glad the book trailer, I'm glad everyone got to see that. I haven't seen it out in the world. I've only seen it in my computer. So I'm glad it's out there. It's around. But yeah, I mean, I think they kind of needed me to make that trailer, because I don't know how anyone else would have gotten, like, you need to be here in Albuquerque to get that feel.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we had to do it.
So I'm wondering if you could talk about you're talking about Albuquerque and overpasses, and we kind of enter the novel in that way with a photographer at the scene of a crime. I'm wondering, what was the seed of the novel for you? You said 10 years in all, but what was the initial seed for the idea for that you were like this? Oh, this is a novel.
Yeah, I think right before I entered the MFA program, I realized that it might be an interesting thing that somebody might want to read. I mean, I originally thought of it as a documentary. I thought I wanted to make a documentary about, like, kind of how Navajos deal with death, and I quickly realized that no one's going to talk to me about that. They don't want to talk about it in general, and they're certainly not going to talk to me about it in a documentary. And then I was in a writing workshop with Joan Tewksbury, and I started to write some of the spooky things that I had experienced, or talking about taboos or things, and then starting to write about my grandma and about growing up on the reservation with her. And it just kind of came together. And right when I was starting the MFA program is when I started to put them together. I started to think that these two narratives could actually be one narrative, and it started to work that way. So right when I started the MFA program, I think I started to start thinking of it as a novel and not a screenplay or a collection of two separate stories, or two separate novels. So I didn't think of them together until then. So that's when I started thinking of how to sew them together as one story. But going to forensics class at APD, I think really cemented the kind of all the crime scene stuff, because I had so much more detail, and we spent 16 weeks, my husband and I both went, we spent 16 weeks learning about all kinds of very interesting cases at APD and about forensics in general, everything from ballistics, like how to match up, casings with bullet fragments, and blood spatter, how to figure out blood spatter, and how to measure things, and it was just so interesting that I knew I needed to just cover all that detail and take real cases and really talk about what happened, because I don't think really everyone has this whole CSI kind of view about how forensics really works, and it's never that fun, exciting, or quick. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful work, and I think that's something that people don't really see in reality. Especially for a Navajo person, it's even more awful. So it's an interesting discussion to have.
Well, you clearly did the research and absorbed it, because it never comes across as a novelist having researched and wanting to share. Sometimes you can nerd out on stuff, and that can come across, but the way that you infused it into the novel, both in the way that it sort of exhausts the narrator, the finding out about all this stuff, but also like sort of her figuring out the mystery by using a lot of these details that clearly you had to have done research to know, and you just did that so seamlessly.
Oh, thanks, Tommy. Well, yeah, I mean, working and doing that work, I mean, I did work in forensics for 16 years. And when you work in forensic videography, it's not very exciting. It's a lot of videotape depositions and listening to our lawyers argue, and going to accident scenes and filming tire skid marks and the inside of people's vehicles after they've rolled them. And it's very technical and very physical work. You have to spend a lot of time underneath semi trucks and climbing into beat up vehicles, and it's not the best work. But I think it gave me the fuel, I think, to kind of put those kind of details into it, and so you can see that this is the kind of stuff that Rita has to put up with on the daily. And so it's pretty scary. And also, go ahead, Tommy.
No, go ahead. No, you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and also like that whole idea of the taboos and working in that industry, right out of film school, my grandma would be really freaked out. So there was also that element of what I was looking at on the daily. And I think the first 6 months of that job, I was really kind of haunted by some of the stuff I saw. I mean, I wasn't ready in some ways to see like bodies and to have to work on cases and do these things. And I realized then, oh my God, this is really forensic work. And I would tell my grandma about it, and she would, send me to the medicine man and do stuff like that. So there was always that stuff to deal with too, the other, the spiritual side of it.
Well, I thought the way that you approached kind of going into the memories of our narrator and her having this kind of being in touch with the spirit world in this kind of way, and the way that the older relatives especially, slowly over the course of the book come to understanding, you approach the taboo of not wanting to deal with death and some of that is real to life, but you also have everyone kind of go through it together. And I thought that was such an interesting way to approach, sometimes with Native stuff and talking about spirituality and ceremony, there's a certain like, let's just not talk about it at all. And I just thought the way that you handled it was you really just pushed all the way through so that all sides were talked about in a really full way. Can you talk about some of the hardship? I'm sure it wasn't easy to figure that out on the page and as a whole in the novel to approach the subject and really push through on some of that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, during my research phase of this, I really did a lot of research about Navajos and their beliefs and because I had my own beliefs and I grew up, kind of having those beliefs myself. So I wanted to find the origins. Where do we start? Where do we start believing in this? And when did it happen? And I kind of felt like early research kind of showed me that we had a very different viewpoint on death before the Spanish flu came to our side of the reservation, and a lot of people died. And we were of course going through COVID at the same time that I was kind of like looking at some of this stuff, and I was thinking, wow, a whole mindset can be changed by something like a pandemic. And I felt kind of like the Navajo beliefs of death and the fear of death and the physical traditions and beliefs that we associate within our families when our family members die, and the fear of it. And I just felt like it was kind of linked to that pandemic more than it was linked to our traditional beliefs. And I think that death is something that we as Navajos need to discuss, we need to deal with. I think we traditionally probably had a different viewpoint on it than we've had for maybe the last 100 to 150 years, because of taboos, because of the encroachment of disease, because of colonialism. And so I think that it's something that we need to discuss and we need to deal with. And when I was writing about it, that was my biggest fear, was how other Diné are going to listen or be able to read this book, and how do I deal with it? What do I say? And how do I talk about this? So it was very important to me to make sure that I didn't cross the line into talking about things that we shouldn't talk about. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I did talk about things that we do need to talk about, things that unfortunately are part of our lives, like crime and the disappearance of, our relatives, and the things that happen, to our people and in our cities and in our urban environments. I think a lot of people don't realize how much is going on there. Anyway, so I just felt like it was something that needed to be discussed. And I'm sure there might be people who are going to be put off by what I wrote, or feel triggered by what I wrote, and I understand that. But I also understand that as just because we've held these particular beliefs doesn't mean that we don't need to discuss it. We don't need to talk about the origin, and we don't need to be afraid. I don't think we should have been afraid. I don't think that's what our ancestors believed. So it's something we all need to talk about, deal with, unfortunately.
Yeah. I love the way, speaking of like kinds of updates and ongoing conversations about who we are. I love the way that you bring in Albuquerque and the city versus reservation, and both experiences, really validating both experiences in a contemporary way, and really just talking about in a really sweet and simple way, the way our narrator loves the city and has a relationship to the city. Can you talk about the decision to have that really play like a prominent thematic role?
Sure. I mean, I think every city has a heartbeat. It's got a life to it. And I've lived in a lot of different. I've lived in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and I've lived in Tohatchee. I've lived in all of these places, and so they just kind of like, they have their own personalities. They are a character on themselves, and I felt like I needed to make them, especially Tohatchee and Albuquerque, a huge part of Shutter. But Albuquerque's got a vibe to it. It's kind of like kind of like a Wild West place. It's like the hub of everything that has come through New Mexico. The trains, the electricity, like colonialism, people, everything that's come through this place came through Albuquerque, and it continues to come through Albuquerque, and it's like a major trade route, and it's been that way for years. So I knew right away. I've had tons of stories about Albuquerque. It's an old town, and then so is Santa Fe. There's a lot of haunted places there. There's a lot of spirits that still live in this town and in these buildings, and I think it's very much alive. And old cities and old towns like that, they're full of life that has long passed. And so I think, and I think the community kind of embraces that and knows it, and it's just like part of our lives here. I mean, actually, at the Kiva here at the Chemo Theater, there's actually a shrine to one of the ghosts there at the theater that you have to feed him so that you have a good show, so that nothing happens while you're performing or you have given a speech or whatever screening. I've had screenings there, and I take him stuff before the screening because we want the screening to go smoothly, right? So like the paranormal, and the spiritual, and the supernatural, I think is really part of our vernacular here in New Mexico and in Albuquerque. So I really thought that was an important way to play that supernatural edge into it, and try to figure out how like Rita would navigate that when there's so many old spirits around, and so that was a really big important part of about Albuquerque for me. And the next book, The Town of Gallup, which is even older and has even more of a history and a heritage behind the supernatural and the crazy things that go on. So I very much towns have a spirit and a soul, and they are their own characters. Absolutely.
Yeah. Might you say the same thing about cameras, because you do use cameras as a way to, no pun intended, as a way to frame your chapters?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I loved your use of these different cameras and the character role they played in Rita's life.
Well, I started that just arbitrarily, like putting just camera models into chapters. I mean, just arbitrarily. I like this camera. I've used this camera. When I was that old, I remember I had this camera, right? So I was just kind of like arbitrarily placing camera models in the chapter notes. But as the chapters and the novel began to really build, I realized that it was a perfect opportunity to track time and to track the passage of years, and to let the reader be able to track what year it was by looking at the camera models that I was putting into the chapters. And so for me, it became much more of a timeline tool. It started out just me throwing, like, arbitrarily doing it, but over time, when the chapters really started to refine themselves, I realized that there was a bigger use for these camera models, and I made sure that each time it referred to a certain year and a certain time in her life, and she either saw this camera, used the camera, or had an experience with the camera. So that was really important for me to show exactly how important image and camera photography was in her life, and not just her life, but her mother's life, her grandmother's life. And it continues. That camera is just there all the time. And then at the end, when we're really trying to just tracking Rita in present time and the conclusion of the case, you slowly see the apertures, the chapters kind of turn into apertures, and so the lens kind of slowly opens. So I didn't know if anyone noticed that, but that's kind of what happened in the way the book comes out. And it seems like we may have lost Tommy. It might be his internet, or he may have ridden off to Montana. Tommy, are you there? But I am seeing, like, oh, there he is. There he is. Tommy's back.
Sorry, I just our internet is not great here. We're in the middle of a move, and I'm back. Anyway, not worth explaining. Okay. I already wasted people's time. But I think we might be okay now.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you were in the middle of saying you were talking about cameras, and I'm not sure how much I missed. what everyone else already heard.
I was just saying at the end that as she kind of resolves the case resolves at the end, the aperture kind of opens. So I also wanted to use like some kind of camera metaphor to pull that through. And then of course, the next book is going to be called Exposure. So the photographic double entendres continue to build. I'm still trying to think about the third. This is eventually going to be a trilogy, and I haven't figured out the third one yet. But I've definitely figured out the second one.
Oh, cool. What do you love about being behind the camera that you can't at all do with writing, and vice versa? What do you love about being behind the keyboard that can't happen behind the camera?
I think what I love about storytelling with a camera is that you don't have to write. I just, you know, you can tell, it's so fun to be able to tell stories through images just by a glance that somebody gives you, or emotion on someone's face, or, you know, like a crowd of people moving in on someplace, or a beautiful landscape and the people in it and the language that comes with that. And there's just something so wonderful about being able to catch the sounds and the smells and the sights of everything when you're filming. You know, but the thing that's kind of tough about that is it's hard to be a filmmaker, physically, emotionally, financially. It's hard, especially when you're a documentary filmmaker, to make a living doing what you do. So as far as, let's see, the thing about writing that I love the most over film, doing film, is that I can do whatever I want. You know, when I'm writing a screenplay, all I do is think about the budget and how much I can afford it. And there's no way that anyone's ever going to produce this or give me the money to make this, or, you know, this location is just too possibly far, and where would I put everybody? I mean, this is what I'm thinking when I'm writing a screenplay. There's something super, I don't know, kind of handcuffs you to your story. Like, you can't go too far because you're limited. But when you're writing fiction, you can write about anything, and you don't have to worry about your budget or where you're going to put your cast and crew when you're when you're filming the scene. I mean, it's nothing like that. And you can write about anything and anyone, and you can write out of personal experience and still write fiction. People will never know what a part of this story that you're telling is true and what's fiction, and you don't have the obligation to tell them that. And I think there's something fun about that, playing in a different world and not worrying about the budget. For sure.
I like that way of thinking of it. I'll try to make more, think of more possibilities next time I go to the page in terms of what I couldn't do budget wise.
Yeah. Budgets are awful.
In terms of some of the I'm going to get to other people's questions soon. I'm wondering in the way that you're sort of delving in mystery and crime elements in the book, do you figure stuff out, or is it a process of finding out as you go in terms of some of those elements? Because there's twists in this, and I'm always sort of envious of writers that can do that. And I always wonder if, like, you knew all along and then you had to write the twist, or does the twist happen to get to the thing you find out?
Well, I think the end of the book and the resolution of the book was something that was that went around and around with several different people and editors, and my first 2 or 3 iterations of the end of the book were kind of where I thought it would end up. I always kind of knew how I wanted it to end, but when in my first few drafts, when I ended it that way, I knew it wasn't going to work. And I actually had a couple of drafts sent back from my editors telling me it was kind of Scooby-Doo, like no Scooby-Doo, like it was too easy, like and then it was just like I figured it out, like it was so and so with the mask, whatever. It was just like too much, and I had to work really hard on the end because I didn't want that. I didn't want it to be a Scooby-Doo ending. I didn't want any of that. I wanted people to be guessing right at the end, and it ended up it ended up the way I wanted it, but in a different context. And I felt like the way we ended it was much more appropriate. I think I kind of just cut everybody off, and I was ready to kill Rita off at the end. I mean, I was in that mode. I just was like, I thought that was it. Rita's gonna die. This is the way the case is gonna end. And so, it ended up not being that way. And I'm glad, because it works so much better that way, to the way it kind of weaved itself. But it took a good, 2 or 3 passes there at the end, where Juliet, my editor, was like, okay, Ramona, we got to do this end. And I know you don't want to, but we're going to take the last 10 chapters out. We're going to go put them somewhere else in your computer where they're going to sit, and then we're going to completely start over. And you're going to have to figure that out, because it's not working. And it was good to have a real honest editor that just said that to me, like, it's not working. It's not standing up to the other 2/3 of the book, and you need to go back and you need to fix it. And I'm glad that she pushed me to fix it, because it's much better now. But yeah.
So that must have taken an incredible amount of fortitude. That we're talking about 10 years. You have to sustain belief in your own work, and you're facing rewrites from editors. Can you give for writers out there maybe just one piece of advice, or a couple pieces of advice on how to persevere? That my novel, more like 7 years total. And I know that came with its own challenges, and I'm in the process of finishing my next book, and it feels even harder, even though it's less time. Yeah. Just if you could tell writers out there, what are some things that you do to sustain belief and to persevere over time? Because I know, we talked at IAIA all along the way. There were different conversations we had when you kept, having to find the strength to keep going. So just let us know how you did it.
Well, there were a lot of times that I just kind of gave up on the book. I wrote several drafts, and I would send them into different places, and they wouldn't get accepted, or I couldn't get the first chapter published in even like a small journal. And I had to part ways with my first agent. That was hard, because I was like, oh God, here I am. I think I'm finally going somewhere, and then I lose my agent, and have 28 rejection letters for the book, and what do I do? But I also come from like 25 years of complete and utter rejection in the film world, where you get 20 rejection letters a year for funding, where nobody wants to see your film in any film festivals. I think I was hardened by that. I didn't expect anything ever from anyone, because I just had done that before. I had let my hopes get up, and I thought, oh, this was it. This is it. I'm going to finally get into this film festival, or I'm finally going to get my film out there. And then it wouldn't work. It didn't happen. It didn't work out. And so I always had a very healthy scoop of skepticism every time I went into anything. I just assumed I wasn't going to get it, and nobody cared. And I'm telling you, that's not the healthiest way to be. But I think it's probably just me being hardened from so much film rejection. And I would, when I got the rejection, when I had to part ways with my agent, I would just separate myself from it for like a good month, where I couldn't even look at it. I couldn't talk about it. And my husband would ask me, so how are the rewrites going? I'm like, I'm not talking about it. I'm like taking a 30-day hiatus. We're not talking about the book. And then I would come back to it, and I would be like, okay, let's look at it again. Let's read it again. Let me see what's wrong. And, if you give yourself a good month of not looking at it, and then you come back to it and you look at it, and you start looking at notes that somebody may have sent you last month, or, some suggestions that somebody gave you, and you start thinking about, well, maybe they're right. Maybe this just isn't coming through right now. So I think the best thing I could tell you is to not give up, because you're going to give up 100 times while you're writing your book. But just know that day that you're giving up, and you're having a pint of Haagen-Dazs, and you're watching a bad series on Netflix, and, wallowing in your sorrow, I've been there. Next day, next week, it's going to be okay. And you're going to be able to go onto your computer, and you're going to be able to look at it, and you're going to be able to start moving it around and talk to other people about it. I think my saving grace was having friends and family who were always willing to talk about it. Like, I'm having trouble with this chapter, and my editor is telling me I got to change this, and I don't know what I'm doing. And, you know, sometimes I would call my mom, and we'd talk about this stuff that's completely unrelated. But then I would be like so invigorated to go back and put what she said to me into the story somehow. Or talk to my husband. He's always having to hear me talk about, oh, this scene isn't working and I did this. And he's like, well, what about this? What about this guy? And I was like, well, you know, so it helped to have friends and family that were here to talk to me, and they knew my characters because I couldn't shut up about it. I was just always like, oh, blah, 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 blah. So it helped to get it out there. And then, of course, my editor was just wonderful. She's like my biggest fan. And so in the late stages of the book, when we were trying to get it done, she was just super supportive and would just be honest, like, Ramona, this isn't working, but you had a good idea back here. Should we move it here? Should we do this? And, you know, it was just having that support and giving yourself time to get over a rejection, or getting time to set the chapters aside. And in some cases, like, just getting rid of chapters that are weighing you down, and it's hard. But the thing is, it's like, don't get rid of them permanently. Like, have a file. I have a file on my computer that's like the stuff, you know, the stuff that I couldn't use somewhere else, but I have it all there, and it's still alive in a file somewhere, so I can go back and look at it and read it. And I might pull some of it into my second book, or I might use something else for a different story, but it's always there. Don't feel like you have to get rid of it forever.
Yeah, that's all great advice. And I do the same thing with editorial letter feedback. I just can't even, I can't look at my own work, and I have to like really sit with it, and it makes more and more sense the more time goes on. And just the initial feeling is just like getting punched.
It is. Don't take it personally.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take some audience questions. We have this from Rachel B. Who is your favorite character that you have created in your book, and why?
I think my favorite character is Grandma. I think because, you know, she's very, very much based on my own grandma, who I was very close to, Minnie, my grandma Minnie. And I tried to pull so much of my grandma's euphemisms and stuff that she would say to me and things into the book. And so when I read the sections with Grandma in it, I'm always elated to read that, because it kind of takes me back to my grandma again, and I really enjoy that. So she's my favorite character.
Okay, this is from Lainey E. Asks, do you have a process where you map out multiple stories and timelines to successfully connect together?
In this particular one, no. It came kind of haphazardly. I was writing the crime thing in one story, and then I was writing the childhood story in one story, kind of, and then they just kind of melded together. So I didn't kind of keep track of how it was going to move until I was actually writing it into chapters, and then I started to figure out. And it's been like, I've had different editors like put it in chronological order, which messed me up. I tried to put it in chronological order, and it just drove me crazy. I suppose it would read better for some people, but for me, I couldn't take it. So that's kind of those chapters have been moved around a ton, and I just knew that going back and forth was the way to go in this particular book. But in the one I'm writing now, I am kind of mapping them out individually because they're falling a little bit different. So I'm having to figure out how each one is going to be stitched together in the second book, and it's making it a little bit more challenging.
This is from Michael B. How time consuming is completing research for a novel and then fact checking what you found? I think you've kind of already, I mean, at least for part of this, you've answered in terms of the 16 months. And I'm sure fact checking, was that part intense with your team?
Oh my God, yes. The camera models, they called me out on that. Oh, it was so bad. Like, cause remember I was telling you it was just like arbitrarily included. And eventually I figured I started to do the year. So I was like, okay, this is 1983. So let's figure out a camera model from 83. And then I would put it in and my editors would come back like, this camera didn't come out until August of 1983. We're in March of 1983. No, this isn't going to work. Or this camera didn't work with that lens. Or this camera didn't come out until 2008. This is 2005. So it was like, I had to figure out that last editing run was like really figuring out what year it was and then cementing that year and then making sure that every single camera model came out that year. So that was rough. Yeah.
Year and month makes it really hard because you can like make the decision about year, but then that March and August difference can really throw things off, especially if you're like including details about the season or anything that would like really throw off.
Oh yeah,
you've already done.
And I did. It was like, oh, this is winter time. They're like, nope, it didn't come out till like. So yeah, that research was intense.
This is from Donald M. What approach / strategies do you use to conceptualize the plots in your books? How much is tied to current events? Are you already working on the next book? So you've sort of answered both of these questions already. If there's anything in there that you want to. Otherwise, I'll go to the next one.
The next book's called Exposure. I gotta finish it. I gotta get to work. But the plot, I've always been into crime and horror books and horror films and thrillers and crime films. One of my favorite, of course, is Silence of the Lambs. I just watched it last night again because I just can't get enough of that. Anyway, but yeah, I'm big into that, and I continue to be. I've always been into that kind of genre. Do you feel like the tools that you've gathered in finishing the first one are going to help you to finish the next one in a less amount of time? Yes. I think having that first one done and realizing exactly how the story comes together, it's good. I've already noticed the difference in writing the second book. That I already know like how things are going. I already know my characters very well. I didn't have to think about it or rediscover them or do more research on them because I know them already. Same with the forensic stuff. Sometimes I'll write and I'll be like, I don't know if that's right. I should look that up, make sure that's the right term for this. So I would be doing research like right in the middle of writing stuff, and and I'd go off in a rabbit hole for 30 minutes looking up stuff. And then I try to come back to it. So this time it's not like that. I already know. I've written a lot of notes. I made an outline, which I wasn't really able to do until very late in the book last time. So there's a lot of tools like that I've learned to utilize. That's making the second book a lot easier to write. And it won't take as long.
In Donald M's question just now, he's referencing current events, and I'm wondering, since you're writing the next book and it's a contemporary book, are you finding that you're wanting to write about the pandemic, or like you're wanting to keep it a kind of evergreen before pandemic world? Like how do you navigate that?
Well, technically the years we were looking at this first book is like late 70s to early 2000s. So the end of Shutter is roughly 2005, 2004, 2005. So moving forward, this is pre-pandemic. And it's like the year the iPhone came out, which is going to change a lot of things too. And technology is going to change because the camera models are really moving. This is a really big, strange moment of change digitally. So the film cameras versus digital things moving from film to digital cards. So it's a strange moment in time when technology is changing and we're becoming a more digital world. So technically we're pre-pandemic, and the next book is going to be, 2006 to 2008, something around there. So it's still early 2000s. It's still playing out pre-pandemic. I don't know if the trilogy will stretch out that long to hit the pandemic. Rita'd have to be an old lady by then. I don't know if she's still going to be doing her thing, but that's kind of the time period.
Got it. Okay, this is from Italy S. Does the book have to do with you or someone else's real life experience? And I guess just you've sort of talked about, the grandmother character,
Yeah.
and the fact that you did a lot of this work yourself. But is there any other aspects that you felt like you were pulling heavily from your own life?
Well, for my own life, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that the casework, and also a lot of the stuff on the reservation growing up with grandma. There was a lot of the things that happened to me growing up, and I'm pulling things from my memory, which fiction writers do, and we use that, and we give it over to our characters a lot of the time. But a lot of it's just me making things up as I go along. A lot of the story with her mother and all of that just kind of made up, and it's so my mom and my relationship is different than Rita and her mother's. So it's the grandmother relationship. Every relationship is different, but I bring memories and things from myself into those experiences for them every now and then too. But the biggest thing are the court cases, the actual crime cases. The first one that we opened the novel with is an actual case. The first case that I studied at the APD crime lab, and it was different circumstances. And I mean, I don't use real names, I don't use real cases, but I know that these things really did happen to people here in Albuquerque and in different cities. I've used real crimes, either that I worked on or that I studied as part of my training. So they're real. Those cases are real. Those things that happen to people are real. And I felt that was important because crime, working in crime scenes and evidence stuff is super intense, and I wanted people to feel that intensity and to understand it.
Okay, I'm going to some other questions that I just saw. So this is from Pam Gardo. Can you talk about the title? Was Shutter always the title, or did you change it along the way? When did you settle on this powerful one-word title?
The Shutter was like, once I figured out it was going to be about a forensic photographer and it was going to be a woman, it was called Shutter. It was called Shutter from the very beginning because I knew it had the double meaning, and I knew it was going to be a scary book, so I wanted it to have that Shutter versus Shutter meaning. So it was like one of the first things I knew.
Raul Garza wants to know if you'll be at either one of us will be at Indian Market in Santa Fe. I will not.
I will be there. Too bad you're not gonna be there, Tommy. But I'll be there on the 20th. I think we're doing a book signing at MOCTA, which is the Museum of Contemporary Native Art. It's IAIA's museum right downtown. We'll be doing that on the 20th, which is Saturday during Indian Market. So I'll be there. And I hear we'll be at Beasley Books sometime in September. But I don't know the date on that.
Abina D wants to know what was the hardest scene to write in Shutter and why.
I think the hardest scene to write was the first chapter. That first chapter, I think, appeared in workshop as a 5th or 6th chapter when I was at IAIA. It was a later chapter, and it was only like 2 pages long. And I think I just took notes from everyone in workshop, including my instructor, who said that this should really be a whole chapter and it should be longer than 2 pages. And they were like, why are you hiding all this information from us? Like, we want all the deets. Like, and so I did give everybody the deets. And I went back to my notes and went back to the crime scene. I have my crime scene lab notebook. I went back and I looked at the photographs of the scene. I remembered the lectures that I got from the scene, and I put everything in that chapter. And because I wanted that chapter to pop. I wanted people to not be able to put the book down when they read that first chapter. And I worked on it probably longer than any other one. Some of those chapters that are in there, especially the childhood chapters, had very little revision, very little. But that first chapter was revised to death. And actually the opening paragraph, I begged my editor, Juliet, to let me put some of it back because so many people had cut some of it out during the editing process because it was just so wordy, but I begged and she let me put it back in. Like,
I think it's so powerful. And I heard the audiobook, that part of it being read just this morning, actually. I love the narrator. I think, are you happy with the audiobook?
I am. The second I heard Charlie's voice, I mean, they sent me maybe like 3 or 4 different ladies that just read wonderful, but there was something about Charlie's voice that I was like, that's the voice of Rita. Like I just know that she's going to do a good job. And so I asked for her, and she is just wonderful. I was haunted by this because I heard it this morning. It's the first time I'd heard it. And I saw it up and I was like, oh, look, my husband and I were driving. I had to move a couch this morning. So we drove up to Santa Fe, moved the couch while we were there, or while we were on our way. I was like, oh, it came out. And I played it on the stereo in the car. Very exciting. She did such a good job.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited about that. It just sounds so great. Yeah, she sounds great. So way to go, Charlie Clyde.
We have Gina R is asking, when did your love for reading begin?
Oh, my grandma taught me to read. I was very young. I know that when I was in kindergarten, they used to keep me in during recess because I was one of the only kids that could read. And she read me The Giving Tree and, all of those, The Adventures of Peter Rabbit. She read those things to me so much that by the time I was in four or five, I used to, tell her the story of Peter Rabbit because I had memorized it. And, I knew the whole story backwards and forwards. And I'd be like, Grandma, are you ready for a story? And I would tell her the story of Peter Rabbit. And eventually I learned where the wild things are when my son Max was born. So I can recite where the wild things are too. But I really link all that back to my grandma. And also being a Catholic school, they made you read a ton of books every summer. And at the time I just cried and whined about it. Mostly because I had to read like The Man for All Seasons and All Quiet on the Western Front, boring stuff like that. But at the same time, like I'm forever grateful that I got the discipline to read. And then of course going to the MFA program and having to read 8-9 books a semester also really cemented it. At least my knowledge and my love for Indigenous writing, which is something that I didn't have a lot of access to until I got to the MFA program. And it really opened up my eyes to all of these great writers that I had never read before. So super cool. So I love to read. It's finding the time to read these days.
I know. That's where audiobooks come in
right.
handy.
Especially when I'm traveling all the time. I'm going to have to start downloading books for my travels. You just can't, you never have time to read.
I know. Okay, maybe we'll end it on this question on a scary note. Muriel Begay wants to know what part of the story did you find scariest to write? And I'll just add my own little question, add on to this. Was there any spooky stuff that happened in the writing of it that was sort of like, oh, that's weird that it got in here? Or like, I don't know, just any spooky stuff that comes to mind during the writing of it?
Well, I think there's a scene with the kids. There's a scene where a whole family, I don't want to go into too many deets and like ruin it for everybody, but there's a scene involving a family that is murdered. And there's a scene in there where the children are trying to get Rita's attention. For me, that was like one of the spookiest things that I felt like when I was writing it, I was spooked out by it. And like I would write it and then I would read it and I would be like, ooh, like what? That would be like, so there's something about the children being victims and that's the hardest thing to photograph for me when I was working forensics. Anytime I had a case with a young child, that was the one that would get me every single time. And maybe it's because I'm a mom, but there's something about it that is just even more chilling than anything else. It's when you're writing about children or you're dealing with children in forensics and death. It's the worst thing. It's the worst thing. So for me, that was spooky. Anything involving the kids was always scary to me. I'm sorry, what was your addition?
Oh, like was there anything, sometimes when I'm working on a novel and I'm researching, or like it feels like things enter into the book from the outside world in kind of weird or spooky ways. Did anything like that happen?
Yes, because I really have to say that I was never like a big ghost person. Like I thought, well, maybe they exist, but I had never had a personal experience. Like I had never seen anything paranormal happen in front of me. Of course, I've seen it on TV, I've seen people, show me videos or photographs of ghosts or whatever. I've seen it. But I was always just kind of like on the fence about whether it was real, if it was reality or not. So right after I wrote this book, I think I had maybe 6 months out from graduation. So it was like in an early class. We were doing a film workshop at IAIA, and I had a room full of kids in there, and it was early morning, and I was in there with my 2 assistants, Melissa Henry and Keyshawn Brad, and we were turning computers on and getting all the media ready for the students to come in and edit. And I heard something in the corner kind of like make a noise, and it made me turn, and I watched my coffee mug move from one side of this huge conference table all the way across to the other side of the table, and it was like hanging off the table. And I saw it, and Pijan was standing behind me, and I was like, Pijan, Pijan. She goes, I'm seeing it, I'm seeing it. We were both watching this thing, of course, move across the table, and it freaked us out. I was like, oh my God. And Melissa was like, what? She had her back to it, so she didn't see it. We were like, Melissa, you just missed this thing, just moved. So we like smudged out the room. And we had been having problems like the 2 days before in the editing room. We kept losing projects. Like we would try to export edits, and they wouldn't export, or they wouldn't export everything, and we couldn't figure out what's going on. And then that thing happened that morning. So after that, we would smudge the hell out of everything in that room, and the kids, everything. When they would come in, we're like, I don't know what's going on here. But so from now on, like every time I go in that room, I smudge. Every time I have to work in that room, I've had to work in it afterwards. And then I also had to finish the book after I had this experience. And so I think it kind of gave me a little bit more incentive to get a little bit more spooky, or to add a little bit more spiritual, supernatural to the book. And because I finally had my own personal experience, and it freaked the hell out of me. It really did. And I've had a couple more experiences on campus since then, and I've heard other people's experiences around the campus since then too. So yeah, it definitely got in the book after I had the experience.
Well, what a great way to end this conversation. I wish the best for you and the book, whatever is happening in the role, this rolling out. I'm sure it's weird this time because it's still, there's like monkeypox and coronavirus still out there. But yeah. I hope you're not too stifled by all of that, and that the book gets all the love and attention it deserves.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And I'm so looking forward to your new book, and I can't wait for it to come out. When is it coming out? Next year?
Yeah.
And I hope that your face heals, and that you don't fall anymore. Me too. And so for many safe and happy travels, Tommy. And
you too.
Happy rewrite. I know it's fun. And me too. So here we go. Book number 2, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Right on, Tommy.
Okay. Thank you, Ramona.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for coming and supporting Shutter. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. And then the phone rings right on cue.